Konchalovsky was in Los Angeles. We interviewed him there. Michael Hodges is one of the most delightful people you would ever want to meet. He came up to Liverpool on an old people's ticket that was hardly like any money. I mean, we thought we'd have to send him a limo, and we thought we'd have to put him in a hotel. And he said, no, I have friends up here. I'm going to sleep on their floor. Who else? Who else was in there? What other directors were in there? It was, you know what? Oh, Rahul, he was really wonderful too. I don't remember how we got a hold of him, but he was hilarious. And he was in Los Angeles too, so that was pretty easy. We just hired a crew down there and did him and Konchalovsky the same week. Anybody else? Who else was in there? I forgot. It's essentially like organizing anything. It's like organizing a children's birthday party. You know, you just have to know who do you call, get in the train on time, make sure that they're ready for you, all those things. And make sure you get releases. That's very important. Anybody else?
What's his daughter? What does his daughter do?
Well, she was his costume. She was one of his costume people. But I have to say that watching it this time, and I'm going to talk about this a bit, I was incredibly moved and still am by the end when she says, I have to take care of him. There were so many other things I would have liked to have done. I would have liked to have worked with other people, but I had to take care of him. Michael Casey, who's up here somewhere, did an interview with me because I do a series of a visionary fiction series called The History of Arcadia, which I've just done the 4th book for. And pretty much all of it is about a small area that's being encircled by a grand, huge, technocratic area, which is trying to take it over all the time. And the small area is trying to find a way to keep its voice going. And Michael, actually, and I said at the end of the interview, you're never going to be able to write a story based on all the many things that have come up with here. And Michael came up, he said, he caught that what I had said in the interview, which I hadn't even noticed, was that little voice of Kurosawa's daughter has always stuck with me when she said, and when he would go away, we would go, he's gone, he's gone. And my mother would be so happy. And that is what I don't remember any of those other directors. I just remember her. And also the scenes at the end of her as a child, that was a lot of me. I said, we have to have those. And I think one of the things I really caught here, which I hadn't thought about, the first film that we did together was called Three Businessmen, which has been shown at the IFS. And my subtitle, and I wrote that, and my subtitle for that was Dad Has Left the Building. Because it's about three men who go around the world without knowing what they've done and end up with the birth of probably a little girl rather than a little boy, and then they find their way back. And my idea was that we've gone through a historical period and ended a period that began with the birth of a little boy 2,000 years ago, but that there are other values being born now, right? And I didn't realize how much we got that in Kurosawa, The Last Emperor. Of course, he's the last emperor. He's dead. Dad's leaving the building. Leader's gone, right? What we're going to see in a minute is clippings from Emmanuelle Hardluck, which may seem like an odd thing to have after such a grand documentary about such a great hero. But I think that it's actually important that this was made in '99 when we were at the end of a period of thinking about the great hero, the great individual hero who we should all admire and we should all support. And we've now moved into the 21st century, which is a bit more about all of the people that must support something like that, who are usually invisible. Does anybody else have any other questions about the production of that documentary before we get into that? No?
What happened to that movie that they said never got distributed?
Nagataya?
Yeah.
It never got made. It never got subtitled. I had, interestingly enough, I had an argument with Donald Ritchie, the very great critic, wonderful man, who says that it was simply a sentimental movie. But I saw it with how we were supposed to get a celebration of Kurosawa's life, and both Alex and I were talking, and we each had things we wanted to say. And I had seen Nagataya without subtitles because there are no subtitles for it. And it's interesting when you watch a movie without subtitles, and you don't know what they're saying, you don't take in, maybe, what's the most overt level. And what seemed very clear to me was what the movie was about Japan after the defeat of Japan in World War II, and how diminished they had become, and how tragic that was. It seemed really clear, and I said that in my speech. Richie came up to me and said, "Well, this is all very well and good to start arguing with the actual expert about Kurosawa." And he said, but you did give me something to think about, so I was very proud of that. But you can't see it. I mean, we just had a video of it because we were supposed to talk about it at that point. It's just gone. But it's a really interesting movie. I mean, if you ever can see it, you'll see what'll happen is after the war, all of a sudden all of the street signs behind the characters are in English, not in Japanese anymore, not in characters anymore. They're in English. And when in the scene that we showed, where everybody's drunk and dancing, all of a sudden in the background, 2 MPs of the occupying forces come racing with flashing lights because they think they're supposed to arrest everybody because there's so much noise going on. And the MPs are enormous. And the Japanese men are really short. And that was not an accident. And it was not an accident that the lead character then goes to pieces about his cat after having been a great warrior. I mean, that seemed very clear to me. So I think it would be really worth having that released again. Having people look at that. So that's what happened in that movie. Anybody else?
Do you remember if you made the conscientious effort to try to have some gender balance in the film, or if the women that were included were just natural?
There were no women to talk to. And that was very frustrating for me. In fact, we're going to talk about that too. Teruo Nagami was his right-hand woman, the older woman who showed the sketch. And that was it. And his daughter. That was it. And you can see from the clips, and if you see, there aren't a lot of, there are no famous actors, women actors in any of his films. And the themes were male, almost exclusively.
So what you're saying is like, he kind of perpetrated the stereotype of like, always crying Asian women.
Say it again.
We can't hear you.
Sorry, oh God. So you're saying that the Kurosawa is kind of like perpetuating this stereotype of like always upset Asian woman that like needs help. You know what I mean? Like I saw.
I don't think he perpetuated the stereotype. I don't think he was even looking into that. It was interesting when they were saying, which director said he was talking about the tragedy of man. And I was thinking, well, he certainly was. There was nothing ever about the tragedy of women, ever. And he said, and the end of humanism, the way that director defined humanism was strictly a male humanism, not involving any female values. But these films were being made in a period where that wasn't even a question. Women were subsidiary characters at this point. Which is why we are now going to get into Emmanuelle Hardlook. Emmanuelle Hardlook was made in 2000. And we needed the money, and I knew Channel 4 would go for it. And I was really interested in interviewing the actors who participated in it. And we'll see in a minute why I was particularly interested. But we're going to start, Sarah, let's just start with those first clips. They're kind of jumpy, but it just gives you an introduction to what the Emmanuelle films were. Go ahead. Girlfriend, go. Thanks.
I was a little clumsy in the beginning.
I think so.
No, but I've had dancing lessons which came in helpful, so it was never gauche or so. But in the love scenes, maybe I was sometimes too tender. I don't know, but I was very stubborn and did exactly. I said, "This is all I can. I'll do it like this," and then it was okay. Yeah.
Emmanuelle. Emmanuelle, X, was never like this. Emmanuelle is sensual, but she's elegant. She's fantasy, but she's fun. Her extraordinary story allows all of us to look into the face of pure sensuality for perhaps the first time.
The first Emmanuelle film was made in 1974. It was based on a pseudonymous book purporting to be the author's real-life experiences as a diplomat's wife in Bangkok. It starred Sylvia Crystal and was directed by Juste Jacquet. The genre proliferated rapidly. Soon there was a rival series starring the Indonesian actor Lara Gemsa, who'd also played a small role in Emmanuelle 2.
It seemed like a long movie that didn't end, you know, it was always the same story, the same things happened, and I think it's just one movie.
Okay, I can have the light up now. Hey Sarah, give me the light, thanks. So we had a lot of fun with the art direction on Alex's set there. We felt we needed to do some more explaining, and he said, "Oh, I want to lie there. I want to be smoking a joint." He was giving us cut that out. At the time, it was completely illegal at that point. So the Emmanuelle movies were a softcore porn phenomenon in 1974. Softcore porn had not actually made it to the regular theaters. Porno hadn't made it to the regular theaters, and I think the producers thought, this is actually something, we're ready for something sort of more, I wouldn't say elegant, but not just the, not just the quote unquote thought of like the filthy guy, in the bathroom, but something more like the women might like, the regular theater. Now, the reason why I was interested in these movies, which we're now going to look at an explanation that we said in the documentary, was because it drove me absolutely out of my mind. These movies were very badly made. Very badly made. They're very silly movies, right? They're just an excuse for a lot of softcore sex. But spaghetti westerns are very badly made. They're very badly acted. They are just an excuse for endless violence. And yet, spaghetti westerns get a lot of praise, get a lot of cinema, get a lot of books written about them, the actors get to go to film festivals. These women don't get to go anywhere. They're both, Sylvia Crystal's now dead, unfortunately, of cancer a few years ago. Lara Gemser's hiding out, and you can hear the crow, the hens, or what do you call it, the cocks crowing in the background. She lives on a farm, she won't talk to anybody. She's just like trying to live her life. Nobody's inviting her to a film festival. So, hey Sarah, show the next one, could you, when we talk about that? And it's funny, because the spaghetti western stuff, I was really struck by all the violence that was happening in all the Kurosawa clips, too, this time. So.
I used to really love spaghetti westerns. So much so that I even directed one, starring Dennis Hopper.
Such a lovely town. AM, PM Mini Mart? Be just like America.
Spaghetti westerns were just like the Emmanuelle films. They were mostly badly made, repetitive subgenre pieces. The only difference was that spaghetti westerns were about violence, and the Emmanuelle movies are about sex. Today, spaghetti westerns are critically acclaimed and endlessly imitated by filmmakers all over the world. Sergio Leone, who described one of the rape scenes in Once Upon a Time in America as an act of love, is generally viewed as one of the cinema's greatest directors. Fantasy violence is now eminently respectable, but fantasy sex, like a large portion of its audience, women, is still viewed as suspiciously second-rate.
Well, I can't argue that. What we're going to see next is, probably, is this the bit, my biggest shame, the biggest shame of my career today. We interviewed James Furman, the British censor who tried to censor Emmanuelle in England tried to stop it being shown. And he's going to explain why he tried to stop it. And he sounds so reasonable. He sounds so much like he really wanted to protect those young women from seeing this horrible stuff. We had also interviewed Nadine Strawson, who we'll see her in this clip too. She was then head of the ACLU. She, in the original version of this documentary, she wiped the floor with him. She just totally wiped the floor with him. I'll tell you what she said after we've seen what we were allowed to show. And Channel 4 told me I had to cut it. And I said, why do I have to cut it? And they said, well, it's not really even. She wins. And I said, well, of course she wins. She was right. And they said, well, no, you're going to have to cut her. You're going to have to cut her and replace her with somebody else. So we did. We replaced her with a perfectly delightful young academic who said very nice things, but who didn't have a really strong personality and strong voice and didn't wipe the floor with him. And this, I swear, I still wake up in the middle of the night sometime feeling ashamed that I gave in on that. But they were, it was work for hire. This was not an original work. I didn't feel that we could argue with them. So let's see James Furman, the so nice censor, the reasonable censor, and Nadine Strawson. Thanks, Sarah.
When I went along to an evening showing, the cinema was pretty full. And it seemed to be full of young women, 18 to 25, lots of office girls who came together. There were lots of women without men. Women came in groups, young women, as if they were learning together and could go off and giggle and talk about it afterwards over a drink. And that was something new. There'd never been the idea of sex films for women.
Part of the reason why we have so many censorial efforts in this country is because so many people confuse fantasy with reality. They think that an image of a rape is a rape. They think that a person who watches an image of a rape becomes a rapist.
It seems to me that it's perfectly reasonable that we should pass perhaps even more explicit scenes of consenting sex. But once it's non-consenting and forcible, and in fact very nasty, then you've got to say it should not be presented erotically.
Some studies have been done by government officials as well as social scientists in the United States, which have found that the major impact that viewing pornography has on its audience is to give them more information about sex and different ideas about how they can enjoy different kinds of sexual activities in the privacy of their own home.
Now, the part that made me cut out of Nadine Strawson was, she says, the Bible has incredible scenes of sexualized violence. Nobody ever talks about censoring the Bible. She said, what these guys are actually doing is they are trying to control what women can see under the guise of saying, I'm trying to protect them. But she said, these are adults. If they want to watch these movies, let them watch it. And I was very struck by that, because why are we not trying to protect young men from wanting to cut off other people's heads, or shoot them with arrows, or lie in a battlefield with thousands of dead horses and dying horses? Why are we not trying to protect young boys from that? Why are we trying to protect young girls from watching about sex? I was a teenager when the Emmanuelle movies came out, and I went to see them in the theater. And I really enjoyed myself, too. It was a really stupid movie, but I really liked it. And it was mostly young women in the theater, interestingly enough. Now, I think that is a really interesting question. Why? Don't you think? Why do we laugh and snicker at one and give the other one so much room to become great art? Why is that? I mean, I think that's really something we should look at. Why is the story we tell that the things that the women are doing is somehow lower class than violence? Why is that? Who's that serving? What do I got coming up next? The other thing, this whole concept of genius, right? There's no explanation in the Kurosawa films except when I was lobbying to have the daughter in there. about who was supporting him, what was happening. There's this endless thing that he was single-mindedly about his films. Well, who was feeding him? Who was washing his clothes? Who was taking care of his needs? Who was loving him? There's none of that. That was all what somebody more in a book called Capitalism and the Web of Life, which I just read. He says that capitalism rests on 4 cheaps. Cheap resources, cheap energy, cheap food, and cheap labor. Appropriation, usually the labor of slaves and women. That in order for many things to function, you have to have lots of free labor. Free childcare, free love, free somebody's cooking, free shopping, right? I think there's an argument that that's what's going on here. And that one of the reasons why Emmanuelle movies are interesting to me, and also stupid, is because they haven't gotten, those looking at that area of the civilization hasn't gotten enough energy yet. Whereas we're given tons of energy to the idea of the single-minded genius who creates these wonderful things that somehow spiritually uplift us, right? I mean, I don't know, was anybody else really struck by how much violence there was in the clips that we, I know, I was actually, good Lord, that was amazing. And there is an incredible amount of beautiful violence in these Kurosawa films. I mean, they're incredible movies, don't get me wrong. I mean, that's one of my favorite directors. That was why we picked Kurosawa, because both Alex and I could agree on Kurosawa and Luis Buñuel, but not on everybody else. I hate Sergio Leone. So, yeah, he's not too keen on some of my favorite directors. So one of the things that we try to get through in here is that really these actors, they're trying to make a living. It's not about the great being heroic, the great genius. They just want to make a living and have a good time. Well, what's wrong with that? Right? So, might we consider that this whole genius thing is a way to keep a certain group in power? We may consider that. Anyway, let's look at these clips about how the women felt about acting in those movies. Sarah hit it.
I was very pleased to do the film, since I'd never been in Thailand before. And also I had a feeling that this film was unlikely to be released because it wouldn't pass censorship, I think. And the producer really didn't want to bring out this movie in a specialized X-rated theater. He wanted it in a normal theater.
The script, I didn't really read the script, but they told me I was doing it in Kenya, so I said yes. That's the only idea to go to Kenya. I was pretty much okay. I didn't care about the script.
I needed money.
If you're not used to it, I mean, it's hard to make love with a woman. I mean, it's really hard, but you know, you get paid for it, so you do it. You just do it.
That was actually my favorite part of the documentaries when she says that. I have to tell you, Sylvie Crystal, when we got to interview Sylvie Crystal, she wouldn't meet us in her house. She met us in the bar downstairs. She lived in an apartment over a bar in Amsterdam. But the bar was really, really loud. We couldn't do an interview there. But after about 10 minutes, she realized that we were not there to stitch her up. We were not there to make fun of her. We actually were there to talk to her about what had really happened. And she it still really gets to me. She walked away for a minute and she came back and she said, okay, why don't we go up to my house because it's much quieter up there. And so that was her house. And that was a very big deal. And you hear my voice there because we realized that to have me interview her was probably a lot. She would feel safer talking about it. Laura Gemser, it was very difficult to get an interview with Laura Gemser because she's hiding out and she had married. The reason why she got into becoming Black Emmanuelle was she wanted to act. Her husband was an actor and she was crazy about her husband. And they offered her all this money, and they said he could have parts in the movie too. So she went, she said, okay. So she did it. He died, she stopped doing movies, married a friend of his, and moved to a farm outside of Rome. And she's Dutch Indonesian, and we had brought a Dutch crew that we worked with, and 3 businessmen, and they talked in Dutch when we got there. And I asked them later what she said, and my crew said, she said, are these people going to stitch me up? Tell me now. And we told her no, we weren't going to. And I just thought, this is terrible. You know, this poor woman. And I still get the most weird emails from people saying, can you get me in touch with Laura Gumser? And I mean, this was like, this was 2000, this was 18 years ago. In their heads, Laura Gumser is still whatever she was in the 70s. And it's not nice. You know, it's not good for them. So I really admired this woman. I thought they worked really, really hard. And I thought, making a film about sex, that was a good start. So I wanted to make this documentary. But we didn't show it tonight because it's a pretty stupid documentary in a lot of ways.
Well, just again, the screenwriter who passed away was, and I have to say, Akira, which we're showing tomorrow, I previewed the print, it's beautiful, and there's no slaughters.
Oh, I have to say, Akira is my favorite Kurosawa film. I think it's the best. It's the most humanist. It's the most about being human, really, rather than about being a decaying, dying, wonderful father figure and genius. So that was what I wanted to talk about, and I had one last clip, which is just a tiny one, that will show, and then I'll see if anybody wants to talk about any of these issues. So can you just show the last clip of Laura Gumser saying what's fun?
The movies were okay, but, you know, seeing the world, being paid, that's fun.
I agree. Somebody would you like to comment on any of this? Ooh, what? Where?
I saw a hand over there. So
What happened to Kurosawa? I don't really know the story.
What happened to him?
Yeah.
He died.
He just died naturally.
Oh, when he was old, he died of old age, yeah.
Oh, nothing dramatic.
Well, I mean, he tried to kill himself at one point when his movies were failing. He slashed his wrist in the bathtub and his son found him.
Right, you showed that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't think that was, I mean, I'm sure he was under a lot of pressure, but you can imagine how his family must have felt about that too. Yeah.
Are there any concrete changes or proposals that you've heard as part of the MeToo movement to change the film industry? Is there anything that excites you or you think is...
Oh, the whole thing excites me. And you get just the fact that we're having a conversation excites me.
But what do you think is really needed in order to have some kind of, I don't know...
Transparency.
Or higher body that you can go to when powers are being used?
Well, I mean, the main thing is transparency, which is what's happening now. Because when the story started to come out, I and every woman I know would say, well, of course it happened to me too. And literally every woman, and literally every man we would say that to would go, you're kidding. And it's not like we hadn't been telling these stories, because we had. We've been telling these stories to everybody, but it wasn't being heard. But for some reason, it hit a thing where it could go over. That does happen culturally, right? This is why each individual's contribution to things is so important. You might think you're not being heard, but you're actually contributing. If you're telling the truth, you're actually contributing to a mountain of truths that eventually are going to be seen. I still remember I was working on a Hollywood film when the Anita Hill testimony was happening, and it was Clarence Thomas. And every day, essentially, I was hearing the same things that she said she had heard from Clarence Thomas. Because I was working with nothing but men. And I had been brought into a film because, this is funny, I had been brought into a film because they had a problem with the script. And the reason they had a problem with the script was because the heroine falls in love with the hero because after he rapes her. And they knew there was something wrong with the script. So somebody said, you know, we need a chick. And so somebody else said, I know a chick. And brought me in, and I read the script, and they said, what do you think is wrong? And I said, well, here's the thing, guys. You want this to be a comedy. I said, and you know what? You can't write a comedy about a woman who falls in love with a rapist. And they all went, really? And I said, yes, because you know what? Women don't fall in love with their rapists. I said, you might want to make something about how psychologically damaged she is, but then that's a noir film. That's not a comedy, it's not a romantic thing. It's not romantic. I'm like, look at that, and I'm thinking, right? And then, so we got to rewrite it, we redid it, and it's still kind of a stupid movie, but at least it's not that. And I would go home to my first husband at that point, and Anita Hill things would be on, and he'd be shouting at the television because he was insisting she was lying. And I'm like, she's obviously not lying. I mean, I had to hear worse things than this all day today, and they all thought it was funny, but he couldn't even hear me. You know? So, younger women, right, you are actually moving on what happened to all of us older women, and where we were trying to be heard. And I think part of the great thing is the internet, actually, because you can actually connect with people and find out you're not the only one it's happening to. I mean, it's literally true. Every woman in here has had an experience like that. Every woman has had some guy doing something horrible like that. And every woman's just had to live with it. I mean, that's what you do. But you don't have to anymore. And it's not a good thing to do either. It's not a good thing. So it's not a good thing, and that, I think, is what's interesting about the fact that we made the Kurosawa documentary in '99, or made the Emmanuelle documentary in 2000. Yeah.
Could you spit out a bit more on what the reception of that documentary was? I mean, did people see it as you're describing it like,
No.
oh, wow, why are we not?
No.
No.
No. They were thrilled. They sold the Emmanuelle documentary everywhere just based on the title.
Right.
Everybody just wanted to see the sex clips. Yeah, no. Nobody paid any attention. And nobody paid any attention to Kurosawa's daughter in the original, in the Kurosawa documentary either. They weren't ready for it. You don't see what you can't see. The story develops. Everyone's contributing to the story. The story is changing, and that's the really important thing, is the story is changing. Everyone's contributing to it. And we have to change the story now to something better than what's been going on right now. Because there are people who are trying to make the story go backward, and that is having a very toxic effect on the culture.
Never mind.
What?
Are you familiar with Gershon Legman in Love and Death? We'll talk.
Okay, email me.
If I remember right, there was only like 7 Emmanuelle movies that we were from, like 1974 to like 1982. There was a whole series of Emmanuelle movies.
I think there were 5.
I think Sylvia Crystal and Marika Green did like 2 of them, or
She did 4.
well, there you go. What happened to the other 3? Did you follow up on these movies?
Yeah, and I mean, in the documentary, we did a lot of things about Black Emmanuelle, about the Black Emmanuelle series.
Right, but I mean, the Sylvia
You can see the whole thing. Pablo can love it too.
I was a teenager when the Emmanuelle movies came out, and you know, I wasn't allowed to see Deep Throat, but I was allowed to see the Emmanuelle movies.
Cool. Cool.
At least 4 that I remember.
I think I snuck. I was not 18, but I think I snuck into the first Emmanuelle. I went to see it by myself. It was great. And Ghirardelli said,
The first Emmanuelle was 5. I didn't see that one.
You were only 3.
But the fact that it was a series and it was supposed to be somewhat prestigious, like
No, it wasn't prestigious or nasco.
The pretentious, glossy cinematography and the locations, and this is soft porn, which by definition is offensive, even more than hardcore. And trying.
Why is it offensive by definition?
Because it's phony. Because it's selling you something while at the same time not.
Okay, so why?
It's hypocritical.
Okay, so how do you feel about the spaghetti westerns?
No, I don't think about. Your husband wrote a book about them.
I know, but how do you, as a cineast, think
I
about
was
it?
really serious about. I was really interested in the series, the fact that Emmanuelle became a series, and it has several lives, right?
Yes.
Including spin-offs and.
Yes, it was huge. It was a huge franchise.
At one point, there was an Emmanuelle series on like Cinemax or something like that.
Huge.
Television.
Yeah.
And
how many books have been written about it?
I know, and movies made about
And how many film festivals celebrate it,
So,
as opposed to the spaghetti
so
westerns?
that is that what is fascinating is that there's an attempt to legitimize something while at the same time, as you say, I mean, they're shooting movies anyway, and they always were.
To legitimize, I mean, I don't think the goal was to legitimize it. I think the goal was the producer saw that there was a niche that wasn't being filled, which was, there was a niche for a higher end softcore porn. And they went for that.
But you suggesting that these were more targeted towards female.
Yeah, I think they were. I mean, I think it was also like, they saw that there was an audience there that wasn't being tapped. You know, for the usual Mitchell Brothers
The
movies.
title of your movie has a blonde movie in it, right? Emmanuelle.
Yeah, so the heroines dress beautifully and they go to exotic places and we have a whole series in the documentary where Laura Gibson talks about the fact that she's a photographer and she goes to exotic places and then the next thing you know she takes her clothes off. So yeah. Cool. Yeah.
Hi. So I grew up in the age of like the internet, and to be honest, when I heard that they were X-rated theaters, when I was probably like 13, I was like, what the heck? This is a thing? Like people did this? This is wild. So in my opinion, when it comes to sex being shown on film, and due to the kind of family culture that I'm sure a lot of other kids my age growing up, there's a lot of helicopter style parenting around the things that you watch, and a lot of people in our age, in our generation, believe that the things that you watch affect you, like really.
Of course they do.
Of course they, yeah.
Yeah, of course they do.
But like, when it comes to violence, a lot of kids are out here watching like Quentin Tarantino movies. When there's a Quentin Tarantino movie, the way he like shoots it, it's satirical or something. It's like a joke.
Yeah.
And but like, not that sex is, the thing is that people have built up sex to be this like huge, at least in my culture, it's a huge monumental thing. Like people will constantly talk, like someone will talk to me like, oh my God, I lost this last night, or I did this last night, or I'm like, okay, cool, I'm trying to brush my teeth and like not trying to think about this because I'm trying to be straight and narrow. But the point is that sex is like a trophy, is like a goal for a lot of kids our age, and that's why we joke about it for sure, but we also like treasure it in a weird way.
Well, I think that's right, but I also want to emphasize, because I do think personally that we have a real problem understanding boundaries here, which is that there is a difference between children and adults. Children need to be in a protected space so they can grow up and they can think about things on their own. But once you're an adult, you should not be protected because of your sex. Because you're a female, you do not need to be protected by a censor from seeing something. You can make your own decision. But that does not mean that a 12-year-old child has to have it forced upon them. A 12-year-old child should be protected until they're an adult and then they can do it. I mean, I'm always saying, friends are always saying, you can't swear around my kids. And I'm like, well, I drink around my kids too. You know, they need to understand that I can swear because I'm an adult. And I can drink wine because I'm an adult and they can't do it. When they're 18, they can do it. That's enough, that's fine. So that's my opinion. It's not really about the movies.
Can you share a little bit about your book and what other projects you might be working on here?
Yeah, I have a small press because I'm really interested in all these questions essentially. And at one point, what I realized was that the only stories that a lot of people I was working with that they had in their head were stories of domination. They didn't have another story in their head except that in every situation, someone was always on top and someone was always on the bottom, and someone, usually a really brilliant white male, had to be directing everybody else. I mean, I kept running project after project where nobody could get past that. And I thought to myself, you know, really? What's really interesting is I would like to join with as many people, and there are many independent presses that are doing this and all over the world. I'm fortunate to know a lot of them, where we are actually looking around for stories that either analyze this or try to present a different way of looking at things. Maybe a partnership relationship, that the world could possibly be in a partnership relationship rather than a domination one. Maybe we don't have to dominate nature, maybe we could be in partnership with it. Wow, what a concept, huh? So I have a publishing house that came out of this film company called Exterminating Angel Press, and we publish those kind of books about comic books, for example, The Supergirls, which is a history of American superheroine, which looks at culture through the history of American superhero, a book called Correcting Jesus, which is about how the story of Jesus has changed for 2,000 years and why, and who changed it, and who benefited from the changes. That's by an independent historian who has written another book for my press for next year called Mother Persia, about the stories of Iranian women, which are all quite different than what we were taught in the mass media that goes on in Iran. My own books are The History of Arcadia, and the most recent one is my Frankenstein book, because this is the 200th year anniversary of Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, the publication of that. And Mary Shelley immediately, Frankenstein is about that. Frankenstein is about a guy trying to dominate over death. He's terrified of death, so he creates a monster who then kills everything that he loves. And he's totally divorced from any kind of female feeling. Well, males have these feelings too. Females have male feelings, but we usually think of female feelings as being kindness, compassion, attachment, partnership, things like that. And we denigrate those values. We do not value them. We valorize genius Kurosawa there, win the battle, go out there and fight, be single-minded, only care about your movies, not care about your family, die when you can't make a movie anymore, even though your family's still alive and they're all there, and maybe you can have a good time with them when you're old. That somehow we get that story. Oh, that's really great, wow. He was a genius. He died because he couldn't make a movie. He died because he couldn't make a movie? Are you kidding? Oh my God. I'm going to say one more story about that, which is that I actually know 2 different children of friends of mine who died as the result of working on a film where they were worked so hard. They were working like 20 hours a day, and they didn't know how to do it. They were just kids, 18 years old. And 2 different children drove off after the film, fell asleep at the wheel, and died, right? And I have friends who said, oh, they died doing what they loved. And I said, no, they didn't. They died because they were exploited by the directors and the producers of that film, who should have sent them home after 10 hours. That's what they did. But we have this fantasy, It's only the film that's important. No, it's not. The reason you're making the film is for people. What's important are the people. I would like to see that story get more incorporated. There's somebody back there at their end up. Yes.
Just to conclude with a touch of humor, I met Sylvia Christel in Cannes, Emmanuelle, 35, 40 years ago. Accidentally, I found myself in the elevator at the Majestic Hotel, me and her. The elevator goes up. I look at her intensely. It's a temptation to be with Emmanuelle in an elevator, just me and you. The elevator stopped. Emmanuelle goes to the door. She says, I'm not Emmanuelle, I am Sylvia.
Oh, that's a lovely story, and she was a lovely woman and very strong. Yeah, I was quite honored to meet her.
At least I had a chance.
That is a wonderful story.
No, you didn't.
In your dreams. Somebody had a hand up here that,
I wanted to ask on the subject of books, do you think this phenomenon, the contrast between violence and the censorship, is just in film, or is it across all the types?
it's across all culture. Yeah, or the Western culture. All the culture I am familiar with, yeah. Definitely.
So it's not just, you're using Kurosawa as an example, right?
Yeah.
But it's,
Yeah, and I wasn't using it as an example when I produced it either. It was just that was what they wanted us to do, right? But looking at it now, I can see where it fits in. Yeah.
So you're saying, I guess, books, video games, everything, all the media.
The story that we tell about the story, everything we're seeing here is a story that we're telling all of us at once. And that story's changing right now. We're in quite a convulsive period in storytelling. And I'm sincerely hoping, I know everyone here is sincerely hoping that the next story we're going to tell is going to be one that is going to transform things in a good way.
So what do you think, what is the state of censorship for women today?
Oh, I think it's a lot more invisible than it was at that point. And I think that there's a lot of self-censorship too. There still is a lot of, well, maybe I don't know. Maybe it's not really true. Maybe I should really just be supporting other people's points of view. And I think that the more and more that people understand that if you look at who you really are and you actually act on that and you actually talk about that, that actually that's going to move things forward more. And I'm really hoping that the young women are really going to do that and the young men are going to do that. Because you guys are our only hope. Really. Anybody else? Maybe we could end on that note. Oh, young man. One of our hopes.
So do you think that the long-time censorship of sex in media, that definitely exists, I definitely acknowledge that. Do you think it's solely related to gender? Do you think it's just something else about culture that we're just afraid of sex or something?
Well, related to gender in what way? I mean, I think what it is it's also fear of death. And violence is fear of death. Because, sex is the flip side of death, right? I mean, if you have sex, you're going to die. You were born because of sex, which means you're going to die. I mean, unconsciously it terrifies people, really. So there's all this repression about fear of death going on, which is one of the reasons why we see all this violence all the time, because it's essentially trying to assuage that fear that everybody's got. They're going to die, not me. I'm going to kill them. I'm not going to die, right? That's pretty much what it is. So it's not really gender related. I mean, it's across the board.
So then why do you think the movie like Emmanuelle appealed more to like a girl audience than like Sergio Leone maybe appeals more to a masculine audience?
Well, because I don't think girls really generally, I'm not speaking for all girls, but I think generally girls prefer to love other people rather than hit them, right? I mean, let me tell you one other story about it. Everybody here was brought up in science class being told that when we're stressed, we either fight or flee, fight or flight, right? We were all taught that. I was taught that. So a few years ago, there were these two women scientists working in a very high-powered lab, and it was very stressful. They would get together to have coffee together and laugh and make jokes about their colleagues, their pompous colleagues. And one day one of them said, wait a minute, why are we not fighting or fleeing? We're stressed? And the other one said, well, good question. So they went back and they looked at all of the experiments that had been done. They had all been done on men. Every single one. So they went back and they did all of the research again, but on women, and they discovered that when women are stressed, women do one of two things. They hang out with other women, or they take care of children. And you need both. You need the competitive side that fights or flees, and you need the side that bonds together with other people when they're stressed. What we have now is a culture that's out of control and fights or flees, instead of taking on that other partnership aspect. So the more women scientists we get, the better, in my opinion. Thank you probably for letting me do such an odd thing at the very best. Good night, everybody. Have a good night.